patriotism is. It's got to be inside.
They decorate every table inside Jane's Lunch, a third-generation diner.
I feel helpless here in Berryville. What can I do? I can't go to New York and help with those people. I can give blood. But that's the extent of what I can do.
Population 3,000, Berryville is small-town America. Berryville is Mayberry. Only instead of Sheriff Andy Taylor, you find Officer Anthony Roper.
It's kind of funny. I've driven around the last couple of days, and an older gentleman, retired military gentleman, been saluting me and really coming up and asking and appreciating us. And I guess this as a whole, seeing how the country's reacted to all this, that people being very patriotic.
But there is more than patriotism here. There is defiance. Just after Pearl Harbor, a Japanese admiral said, "I fear all we have done is to have awakened a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Listen now to some of the voices of Berryville.
I'm not Bush, but if I was, I'd be relocating the B-52s to Guam. We got to find out who did it.
I'm sure the President Bush is going to take care of business.
You want him to?
Hell yeah. Everybody's pissed, ain't they? Sure.
They usually sell 10 copies of the New York Times at the Berryville newsstand. Wednesday morning, they sold 80, along with every other paper they had. They talk of little else over latte and chocolate chip cookies.
First is, I can't believe it, and now there's such anger, and we better blast the hell out of somebody. Everybody's ready to flatten someone for having done this.
The sleeping giant stirs again now in a small town. Candy Crowley, CNN, Berryville, Virginia.
Our day here is done. Our coverage certainly is not. Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards from Atlanta, Garrett Gutley from here in New York continue our coverage. We'll see you later today.
Get a bump shot.
I think Osama bin Laden better say his prayers.
A call to action from U.S. leaders as a nation and a world continue to struggle to understand the extent of the devastating terrorist attacks on the United States.
While around the clock, hour by hour, minute by minute, grieving family members in New York and Washington wait for any word of their loved ones.
And a dramatic late development. 8 people arrested at New York airports. 4 of them had apparently been challenged when they tried to board a plane on the day of the attacks.
Hello and welcome. We're going to continue now CNN's extensive coverage of America under attack. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards. It is now some 63 hours since the worst ever terrorist attack on American soil, and thoughts are turning to retribution.
An emotional President Bush Thursday vowing to defeat the terrorists.
Now's the time for the country to be united, and through the tears of sadness, I see an opportunity. Make no mistake about it, this nation is sad. But we're also tough and resolute. And now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by coming together and whipping terrorism, hunting it down, finding it, and holding them accountable. The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration.
In New York, the rescue efforts continue at this hour, but expectations are shrinking that many people could have survived the collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and this is why. CNN has obtained these remarkable pictures shot just a few hours ago of the devastation in Lower Manhattan. Just look here. What you're seeing is actually an inside view of the ruins of the World Trade Center right there.
And now, just a few miles from that scene, more arrests, at least 8 people detained at New York airports amid concerns about another attempted hijack.
That's right. Sources say that 4 people were seen at one of the airports the day of the attacks, but fled the ticket counter when challenged. Another man was carrying fake pilot identification. We go now to Mike Betcher for more on this investigation. Mike?
Well, Colleen, indeed that is true. The airport's open today, but the police were closely watching. One of those people arrested was at Kennedy Airport. He was carrying a fake pilot's ID. He was arrested and taken away for questioning. Also at Kennedy Airport, there were another 4 or 5 people who had either false documentation or were in the country illegally who were also arrested and taken away for questioning. At New York's LaGuardia Airport, police detained at least 2 other men for questioning. After the spate of arrests and detentions, all New York area airports were closed again. A few other airports in the U.S. have also shut down once more because of security concerns. Attorney General John Ashcroft said FBI agents are making progress in their investigation, adding that they have identified the hijackers aboard all 4 ill-fated jets.
The total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge, given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18, unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
Mohammed Atta, shown in this photograph, and Marwan al-Shari are 2 of the men on that list of 18, according to federal investigative sources. Both held United Arab Emirate passports, but it's not clear if they are actually citizens of that country. The lives the 2 men led are the objects of an intensive international investigation, stretching from Florida to Germany. In Hamburg, Germany, federal police launched an extensive search of an apartment shared by Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shari last February. During an additional search of another Hamburg apartment, a woman was taken away for questioning. She clutched a baby in her arms as German police tried to hide her with a sheet. During the night, a total of 8 apartments were searched in the Hamburg area. Back in the U.S. in Pompano Beach, Florida, FBI agents converged on a small rental car company called Warwick's. Records show that Atta rented 2 automobiles at that location.
Well, the first contract, he only put on 200 miles, 254 miles or something like that, which is very small. That's exceptionally small. The next contract was the 2-week rental, and he drove 1,915 miles, which he had told me he'd been over on the West Coast. He called me from over on the West Coast.
4,000 FBI agents have fanned out across the country, knocking on hundreds of doors, but before this is closed rather, and over, they're going to have to knock on tens of thousands more doors. Colleen?
All right, it's Jim Clancy. Mike, I want to just make it very clear here. What has gone on at the airports? Were these people actually trying to board airplanes using pilot's identification? What were they trying to do?
Well, the one person had the pilot's identification. It's not completely clear right now. He was in the airport. We're not sure if he was trying to get on the plane. We do know the other 7 people who were arrested for having false documentation, for example, or not being in the country legally. They were trying to get on those aircraft to make flights, and what raised red flags was the fact that they had open-ended tickets, no set return date, and they were challenged. And we're told some of them tried to get away, but all were arrested. And we don't know, however, not all of them tried to get away, but we do not know, however, if they are connected at all with this current terrorist plot being investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
All right, Mike Boettcher, thanks to you for bringing us up to date on the investigation. Colleen?
All right, Jim, thanks. Well, the rescue and recovery operation in New York City still remains very dangerous. The mayor is urging people to be patient because the process is so painstaking. And Garrick Utley joins us right now from the scene there. Garrick?
Good morning, Colleen, here from Midtown Manhattan. The news today, part of this what you just heard, what Mike Boettcher was reporting, the airport's being closed down because of those arrests of suspects. Behind me is that by now very familiar and sad scene, the plume of smoke and dust rising in lower Manhattan under the arc lights where the rescue work is continuing. And the news also, sadly, is that today no new survivors have been discovered, have been unearthed there. The missing now is estimated officially, as you may have heard, at more than 4,760 at the last estimate, and it's only an estimate. That's through a census that was taken by companies who had offices in the building. Also, this has been a day of bomb scares. By noon today, there had been 90, that's 90 false alarms, bomb scares in stores and schools and office buildings. The police had to come, people had to leave for an hour or so, adults, children in a number of schools. That was now perhaps to be expected. It's a terrorism of its own, if you might call it that. And tomorrow, of course, President George Bush will be coming to Manhattan. What's interesting this time is that when a president comes, his agenda, his plan is carefully laid out, but not this time for obvious security reasons. The White House isn't saying where he's going to go, although we expect him to visit the site of the tragedy, or how long he's going to stay here, but President Bush will be here tomorrow afternoon in Manhattan. Let's go now downtown near the site to get some extraordinary close-up looks as to the damage that was caused there by the explosions on Tuesday. Our Gary Tuckman is on the scene. Gary?
Hello, Garrick. It's now been 63 hours since terrorists flew 2 passenger planes into the World Trade Center towers. And small fires still burn, and the smoke is still intense. Hundreds of emergency officials are on the scene 24 hours a day, feverishly looking for survivors. But as you said, the bad news is no survivors were found today. There was some potentially exciting news earlier today. According to officials at the police and at hospitals, 5 firefighters were pulled out of the wreckage. Firefighters who were believed to have been there since this terrorist incident on Tuesday. But there was some confusion. Rescue workers thought that's what they saw, so they said it to the police and the hospital officials. It turned out these firemen fell into the wreckage today while they were being rescuers. They were trapped for several hours. It's good news that they were pulled out, but they were not survivors of this terrorist incident. We hear many times it's like a war zone out there. The rubble, you see it right there. It's just incredible. Tons and tons of wreckage on the ground. It looks like a war zone you hear, but it really, literally is a war zone. We have debris in a 10-block by 10-block area. There's a chapel nearby called St. Paul's Chapel. It's the oldest church in New York City. It's about 250 years old. And there is debris and rubble all over the yard of the church. There is a cemetery next to the church. The cemetery has tombstones from the 18th century, and some of those tombstones have been toppled over because of what happened at the World Trade Center on Tuesday. One of the concerns at the site there is there are 3 buildings surrounding the World Trade Center complex which are said to be structurally unsound because of the explosions. There has been great concern that those buildings could potentially collapse, and that's the only time we don't have officials on the scene 24 hours a day. There have been some times when they've had to evacuate because there's been creaking of the buildings, there's been windows popping out, and that's the only time the rescuers have left. Yesterday, the first time they heard a warning about one of these buildings, everyone ran out of there. It was a very sad, dramatic picture, watching these people who have been working so hard running away. But they are back on the scene as we speak. One other potential problem, the weather is deteriorating right now. Ever since Tuesday, the weather has been nice for these types of operations, but right now it's getting very windy, it's very cloudy. They're expecting a lot of rain tonight, and that could be a big problem as they continue to try to look for survivors. Garrick, back to you.
Thank you very much, Gary Tuckman there in Lower Manhattan. What Gary was showing us, and what we've been seeing these last couple of days, those scenes of the devastation and the death there in Lower Manhattan, of course, was caused, it is believed, by an organization led by an individual, Osama bin Laden by name. Today, Secretary of State Powell put him at the top of the list. In fact, Osama bin Laden is now the most wanted person, most wanted man in the world, with a more multi-million-dollar prize on his head, if you will. But who is Osama bin Laden? Where is he right now? And what does he really want?
The who is the easiest answer. Osama bin Laden is 44, a millionaire born in Saudi Arabia who has used his wealth to finance terror to fulfill his crusade against the United States. The where of bin Laden is mainly Afghanistan, where he built his terrorist camps. The Taliban regime there, which has sheltered bin Laden, has imposed its version and vision of Islam on Afghanistan. Women can work only in health and education fields and have few rights. There is a ban on using the internet and on importing movies, musical instruments, and even playing cards. Western aid workers have been put on trial, charged with the crime of preaching Christianity. In March, the Taliban blew up a pair of 2,000-year-old statues of Buddha, despite international appeals to save the treasures that had no place in the purist Islamic society the Taliban are trying to build. If bin Laden and the Taliban have much in common, bin Laden is more engaged in backing fellow Arabs in their conflict with Israel, which is backed by the United States, and in attacking the leaders of his homeland, Saudi Arabia, whom he sees as the materialistic pawns of a militaristic United States, which has stationed its troops there. And so it is the United States that has become an